everyone. Thanks for joining us for our Fast Chat hosted by Ward's Auto. I'm Adam Ragazzino. I'm the battery and electric powertrain analyst here at Ward's Intelligence. I'm joined today by Michael Hessler. He's the transformation partner in EY's e-mobility practice. Hi, Mike. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Today, Mike, we're going to be talking about utilizing data to demystify EV batteries. Let's jump right in. Mike, can you give a little more detail about why data is important for managing the life cycle of the battery?
Absolutely. And let me just start by talking a little bit about our e-mobility practice and kind of what we're focused on. But currently, and really over the last several years, we've been working with major companies and value-added partners in the building of batteries, the building of the materials, the tracking of the asset once it's in the vehicle. We're working with companies on trying to figure out what to do with used batteries, when to repurpose, when to recycle. And so the point I'm making is we're working with traditional OEMs to make this transition to BEV. We're also working with startups. And what we're finding is there are a number of use cases in that life cycle that are very impactful for trusting the materials in terms of sourcing, to make sure it's not sourced from conflict zones, from managing information in the production process around quality. There's a lot of variability in the production process between batches and between materials. Using data within the factory to understand yields, which are a huge driver of costs. So low yields means more materials, more costs. It increases the cost of the battery. And then once the batteries are put into vehicles during the ownership process, being able to track conditions that the battery experiences from charging at home, from charging with supercharging stations, any kind of events that would be important in terms of micro collisions, maybe flooding, things of that nature. But it all kind of rolls into this life cycle kind of data management concept and platform. A lot of people call it battery passport, but there's a lot of utility and a lot of value in capturing all these events and the history and having traceability of that battery all the way through the ownership experience and then on towards the second life. So we're working with companies right now and trying to figure out how to convert state of health into a market value for that battery, which ties into a large extent the value of the vehicle. And so when do you make decisions about how to repurpose? When do you make decisions on when to recycle? And so that whole life cycle, we see a lot of value being created by capturing data in a platform that can ensure timeless integrity and access to the various players that participate in the channel. So.
Got it. And so we talked a lot about what the industry might get out of it. What about consumers, Mike? What are consumers concerned about when it comes to EVs and their batteries?
Well, I think, first of all, what we're seeing is there's still a lot of consumer sentiment to go EV, to make the transition, right? And there's increase in sales year over year, 2022 to 2023, over 50% increase in EV sales in North America. There's still very bold predictions on EV growth as you get out to 2025, 2030, where by 2030, at least at a global level, the expectation is that over 50% of the vehicles will be EV. So we see strong consumer sentiment. I think some of the challenges, I think there's some short-term challenges and then some more systemic challenges that we need to address. The short-term issues, as we see them, certainly interest rates are driving up the payments and the lease payments and loan payments. And part of that is just the relative cost of EV versus its ICE counterpart. On average, they're 28% higher in terms of purchase price. So if you then apply an increased interest rate to that, it has a real impact of $200 to $300 a month. So interest rates are a challenge. You have overall inflation that's up. So households are trying to figure out, where to spend their budgets. I think the other thing that is a little bit of a challenge in the short term is just the anxiety around range, right? It's been talked about a lot. It doesn't help when studies come out that show that on average, well, I guess the range of actual versus stated is lagging between 12 and 26% in some cases. So I think there's some opportunity to educate the public, right, on what to expect, but then also a little more transparency there so that people don't get nervous about, how their vehicles are going to perform, not just stated ranges, but actual ranges based on if you've got passengers or if it's below freezing or above, a certain temperature. These all impact the effective or actual ranges that you'll get. And again, I think it's another opportunity for leveraging data as you think about capturing, the contextual information around the battery's performance and using tools like machine learning to really help you plan a trip better based on, what you intend to do and what the weather, et cetera, is looking like. So.
Sure. No, that's great. And
now the other thing, sorry to everybody, but there was some longer term things too that I wanted to talk about. Sorry about that. One would be just the price of entry. I mentioned 28% difference between ICE and a BEV equivalent. I think the other thing that's more systemic is availability of charging stations and charging ports. I mean, currently the 36% of the counties in America don't have any charging ports whatsoever. And most of the charging stations are concentrated, in the East and the West. And so there's still a big investment that needs to be made in making, those stations and those charge ports available to consumers. Not to mention some of the complications around, apartment complexes. If I live in a dense urban area and I park on the street, how do I get the charge? So I think that's another more systemic. And then finally, there's just the total cost of ownership. So again, think about insurance, think about service and maintenance. Just because of the newness of the technology, that total cost of ownership is a challenge too for consumers.
No, that's great. And you touched on some of the ways it helps consumers better understand the battery. Can you talk a little more about how access to the data helps consumers really understand their battery?
Well, I certainly think battery health, because that's such a big driver of market value and residual value. So, there's battery management systems in these vehicles, right, that capture a lot of data around the battery all the way down to the cell level. I think there's an opportunity to make this information more available, with, some mobile apps with the technology in the vehicle to help me better understand how my driving, how my charging would and could be impacting my vehicle. These vehicles like to run between 20 and 80%. So how do I optimize when I do charge? What's the optimal amount of time to charge, right? I think that, again, I mentioned machine learning on the vehicle could help. It's simple. I think if you make the data available to consumers, they'll modify their behaviors. It's really that simple, whether that's in charging, whether that's in when they charge, how they drive. Certainly most folks that I talk to that buy and love their EVs, they care about the environmental impact. So even the ESG elements to all this, making that available, I think could have a huge impact in terms of just the overall consumer experience, I guess is the way to put it.
Got it. No, that's great. And what about back to the manufacturers now? How can OEMs incorporate that data into production of EVs and increase consumer confidence and adoption?
Yeah, I think back to the manufacturing. So I think one of the challenges being just price of entry, right? Vehicles are more expensive. So driving scale and economies, but also I mentioned some of the complexities, right, around particularly the battery manufacturing, using analytics in the production process to increase yields, which will drive down costs. But also one of the challenges is today there's no standards around quality for EV batteries, right? So just think about something as simple as your light bulb and having it be certified that it met certain conditions, right, for safe use in your home, or a light fixture, maybe a better way to put it. I think there's a need for some standards there so that as you're producing the battery at the cell level, at the module level, at the pack level, having data that's captured that shows how that battery passed, quality checks, how it performed during a testing process, I think using data to reduce the variation. Today, there's a lot of variation in quality coming off the line for battery cells, for example. So I think there would be huge improvements there on quality and cost. And again, creating that passport around the battery. So I've got the data, it's verified, it's maintained and stays with the battery. I think could create a lot of confidence with consumers that they're going to get something that's going to last, right? I mean, most of these batteries are predicted to last, 8 to 10 to 20 years. The challenge is whoever owns the asset kind of owns the risk of the battery not performing the way it should. And it's such a large part of the investment in the vehicle. I think that's got consumers a little wary as well.
No, that's great. Thank you. And unfortunately, Mike, we're out of time, but this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time today. And I hope everyone out there enjoyed the discussion with EY about using data to demystify the EV battery. Thank you all for watching.
Thank you.